Coming to you live from the city of Port Phillip, it's results time in the 2024 Port Phillip Council election. Well, the counting has begun at the Port Melbourne Town Hall. I've been speaking to scrutineers as the day has gone by, and I can tell you for the seasoned professional scrutineer, it's been a bit painful at Port Melbourne Town Hall, watching the envelopes slowly be opened and then the ballots being put on the table in piles and then counted. So what's being counted today is what we call the Group A votes, which is for 3 wards that have been collected before the 25th of October. So the results we're showing you here tonight are indicative. They're unofficial. These results have been collected by a group of scrutineers who have been kind enough to share the results with us. They're unofficial results for about 2/3 of the votes received, about 4,000 in each ward. So it gives you an indication tonight of who is leading the primary votes. And I can tell you on the 3 wards that have been done today, which is South Melbourne, Elwood and St Kilda, buckle yourself up because we've got some very surprising results to report to you here today. I'll go through the 3 ward results as we've seen them come in this afternoon. Then I'll be joined by my expert panel. Former councillor, 3-time councillor Andrew Bonds will be joining us with Greg Day. Bit of a St Kilda slant on tonight's show, given that there's 7 candidates running to St Kilda and there's very a surprise result, let's put it that way, down in St Kilda. So let's not hold on anymore. Again, if you're live online, and wow, we've got quite a few people online here tonight, please feel free to make a comment and post a question either on YouTube or Facebook. We'll be happy to answer that for you when we get there. Let's go through some of the results now as I bring my notes up. Let's start with the 3 wards we're talking about. South Melbourne is up tonight, where we had 4 candidates. We had 6 candidates, rather, in St Kilda ward and 4 candidates in Elwood ward. 3 of the 4 incumbent councillors are running in these wards here tonight, which is important to watch. Let's first start with the results of Elwood. Elwood obviously is largely bound by the suburb, excluding the component up towards the Ripon Leeds side on the Nepean Freeway side. 4 candidates, 2 endorsed political candidates, the Greens, ALP, the sitting member Louise Crawford, Gibson, the independent, and De Silva, the independent/PPP candidate, is running. 2 of these people were obviously Crawford and De Silva were guests on our previous show. Let's have a look at the results now that we're seeing in here. Reminder, these are unofficial results being compiled by scrutineers on the Group A counting, which is ballots received before the 25th of October at Port Melbourne Town Hall today. This is not the final result. This is the indicative primary vote. Let's have a look. So Louise Crawford has come in on top with 1269, followed by the Greens candidate 1230, and Janet's coming in 1195, and well back is Sally at 633 votes. In percentage terms, it's 29% to Louise, which is, it sounds solid in itself, but when you've only got 4 candidates, that's not high enough to put yourself in a commanding position, I would say. Lydiana, representing the Greens, has come in just under 29%, which is solid, but again, not a dominant position there either. Janet, PPP, has done extraordinarily well from an independent point of view, particularly up against an incumbent councillor, former mayor seeking a 3rd term, Louise Crawford. She is probably the one to beat at the moment, which we'll talk about with our expert panel, and then Sally Gibson coming in with 15% of the primary vote. A huge upset there, really, in terms of the primary vote numbers there for the ALP, and it starts to show a picture that the traditional powerhouses in this election are struggling. There's been significant swings, you would say, against the incumbent councillors. Hard to judge exactly, given the last ward structure is very different from this structure. But let's continue on and you'll start to get a bit more of a taste of that trend also. Now, South Melbourne has provided a significant surprise. Let's go into this straight away. 4 candidates, Mullahy representing the ALP, James, third-time candidate representing the Greens. Jay, representing the ratepayers, the residents of Port Phillip. She definitely put a solid campaign in, and she made a very compelling argument on our show here 2 weeks ago. And also Lewis, who you'd probably describe as a running mate for Jay. Let's go straight into the results now and have a look. A big upset here, I would suggest to you, with Jay coming out in a dominant position. Why don't we just go straight to the percentages? Just under 30% of the primary vote of the 4,000 odd votes that have been counted. How many votes have we got counted in total in South Melbourne Ward? It's 4,491 total votes. ALP coming in at second at 25.9%, which again I would say is pretty disappointing given there's only two candidates in this election, and this is a dominant ALP area from a state and a federal election point of view. Trina Lewis came in at a very impressive 25% of the vote. Not a huge amount of campaigning, a well-worded statement that went out with the ballots, and obviously a keen supporter of Betty. So we would expect a lot of those of Trina's preferences to go to Betty. And then in fourth position, I would say fairly disappointing, 18% goes to Earl James for the Australian Green. So look, that is a surprise result for me, but we'll go to our experts panel and learn more about it. Let's keep on moving with the results. Finally, we go to St Kilda, which, you know, as we talked about on the show here earlier 2 weeks ago, which a number of you didn't actually get to see, but St Kilda is a hell of a ward to try and pick what's happening here. You've got 6 candidates, 2 incumbents are actually running in Robbie Nwagi and Tim Baxter, representing the ALP and the Greens, respectively. Let's have a look at how the ballot has gone for the 4,381 votes that have been received so far in the primary votes for St Kilda. Here's our candidates again. We got Tim Baxter for the Greens, Jenny Roper, a solid independent, local Facebook group owner, etc., and worked in the education system. Serge Thurman, seeking his third term on council. I think City of Port Phillip, one of the City of Port Phillip's longest serving deputy mayors as well. Bolger representing the Victorian Socialists. Nwagi, current incumbent councillor representing the ALP. Third election for him. He was elected on countback following the Greens, Catherine Copsey moving to the upper house in the Victorian Parliament. And David Blakely is the 6th candidate as an independent. Let's have a look at the results. Here they come. Jenny Roper has come out on top. Again, I'll go straight to the percentages. 25.75% of the primary vote, which is an enormous vote, really. It's very impressive. There were some numbers going around here on the primary vote, also just for Jenny to clarify for Greg when he comes in at 12.28. We've downward revised that based on our initial estimate from 12.28, but still a very impressive number for Jenny Roper. Serge Seaman coming in at second at 23%, very, very solid. Many people expected that. David Blakely coming in at 16%, which is credible. What we didn't expect, well, I didn't expect anyway, was the result from the ALP and the Greens. Robbie coming in at under 15% and Tim coming in under 13%, and then the Victorian Socialists coming in at 8%. So look, some very interesting results here to go over. It's now time to welcome our expert panel to the stage. Andrew Bond, welcome. Greg Day, welcome. A day of huge surprise in many respects. We spent a lot of the afternoon going through validating that these results were actually correct. Andrew, give us your biggest surprise on what you saw in these results, and I'll bring them up as you talk.
There's no doubt the biggest surprise is Tim Baxter. I think I expected him to finish in the top 2. In fact, I thought he would finish first in St Kilda, and it would just be a matter of could he hold on to get to the 50% plus 1 vote as preferences were distributed. For Tim to come in 5th position is a shock to me, not just a surprise, a shock. And I think it will be a shock to many other people also that he has finished in 5th position in this ward. Given he did do a lot of campaigning, he was out there door knocking, he was out there at every market. He started campaigning back in February and March, whereas many of the others only started campaigning very late in the picture. So for Tim to finish in 5th position is
Well,
very
that's
surprising.
the shock on the downside. What about the shock on the upside?
I did think one of the independents would get 20% or higher. I thought that might be Surge to Man would finish highest out of the 3 independents running, but for Jenny to finish top and then David and Surge to also finish 2nd and 3rd is quite a great effort from the 3 of them. It's not something I thought would happen. I thought one of them might get into the top couple, but for all 3 to be 1, 2, and 3 is a bit of a surprise.
And it really paints a picture that the major parties in this election are on the nose, particularly compared to the last one, which is interesting to note. Greg, you give us some commentary here on St Kilda. You're an expert in this area and well respected.
Well, it is a surprising result. I think we've got to be careful that's only a proportion of the votes being counted, and we don't want to write off anybody. But, I think Tim suffered because the Socialists have cut the left vote. So if you add those 2 together, that would have been 20%. That would have put him up 3rd. And as we said in the other broadcast that no one else has seen, is that the mystery in this vote was where would the blue vote go? And, the blue vote is spread across Jenny and David and Serge. So it's not surprising that those 3 have got a leg up over the others. Now, I think there's another factor in here that we have to consider. That I said last time, there's a woman's vote, so that will have helped Jenny, and there's a donkey vote happening in this election because there were no clear issues in some places. So when we get to some of the other, particularly in South Melbourne, we'd have to consider the power of the people just numbering from top to bottom.
From the small amount of information I got from scrutineers today, that they did notice in South Melbourne in particular, they felt the donkey vote was very strong. Less so in St Kilda. From these aren't experts; they're volunteers there, so take that from what you would. But yes, there was a very solid trend on the South Melbourne commentary that I received. Before we jump off St Kilda, is anyone hazard to guess in terms of a bit of a prediction on who's going to win this ward?
I'll go first then, Marcus. I think Surge to Man will probably win the ward here. He will probably make the final 2 versus Jenny Roper, but Surge will be preferenced by Tim Baxter, Robbie Nuage, and David Blakely. Surge would probably only need to get about 52% of preferences from that group to be able to narrow the 100 vote gap we see here between him and Jenny, which he should do quite easily given the 3 preferences he's going to get from the 3 candidates below him. There is a very, very narrow window for David Blakely here. He is preferenced above Taman and Roper on Nuage's ticket and Baxter's ticket. So should there be preference flows from there, he may be able to narrow that 300 vote gap between him and Surge to Man in order to get into the top 2 against Jenny, but he would need 70% of preferences from Robbie and Tim respectively in order to make it through to the final 2. And if he was to make it to the final 2, that would probably get Jenny Roper home because Surge to Man's preferences would flow very strongly to Jenny Roper. So I think Jenny should be willing David on here. So for David to get into the final 2, which is Jenny's best chance of winning. But if no one is able to make it into that final 2, I think the preferences from Blakely, Nuage and Baxter will get to Man home over Roper. That's how I see it playing out. Greg, what do you think? You willing to put your head out and put a prediction here?
I'm not in the prediction business, but I've done a spreadsheet according to people's tickets, and when you do that, it comes out at Roper and Blakely being the last 2. But then when you start considering that it's definitely a fact that people won't follow people's preferences, that they'll spray all around. And so, as best as I can say, it'll be one of those top three.
Yeah, I think we'll all agree with that. That's for
That's
sure.
all I can say.
We're on a consensus ticket on that one, Greg.
Yeah, look, I'm prepared to put my head out on this one, and we'll put the prediction up on the screen. Pearl and Bond both predict a Surge Demand victory in St Kilda. I think
Yeah, you could be right.
Jenny's last on the ticket of pretty much all of them, undeservedly so, I would suggest. If there was a situation, as Andrew's talked about before, where David got above Surge, then there's more of a chance there for Jenny. But wow, what a result for Jenny Roper in terms of she's beaten seasoned campaigners. She's beaten two political parties here. She's beaten Surge, who's a two-time councillor and well-versed campaign team. And it's all credit to her. She's done a very, very good job. So, but we'll have to wait and see. Keep in mind, this is only half the votes that have been counted, or perhaps probably a little over half. We don't know exactly yet. I'll get those numbers tomorrow when I go back to the Port Melbourne Town Hall. We still have to wait for the residual amount of primary vote to be counted, and also the preferences to be distributed in this ward. Now, we talked about St Kilda before. Gentlemen, let's have a look at it. Sorry, South Melbourne before. Look, I'll go first on the predictions on this one. I think this one to me is almost fairly obvious to call, but keep in mind the ballots coming in after the 25th will probably go more to the ALP and the Greens, one would suggest. But Betty J is in a commanding position here. She's got a good percentage of the vote at almost 30%, and based on Trina Lewis's preferences, which I think will stick going to Betty, and also I heard from scrutineers today that some Greens preferences were flowing more to Betty than the ALP, which is a bit of a surprise to me, depending on who the final two are. That probably to me looks like a well-deserved but probably surprising victory for Betty J of the residents of Port Phillip. Greg, any thoughts on this one?
Oh, well, I think the outstanding primary vote for Trina has sealed that deal, that it will be Betty. And, Betty is receiving Trina's preferences in the ballot pack. And also Trina, I think, is number one on the ticket as well. So there's a flow through there. So, the Greens will be disappointed. Betty J is the odds on to win this one.
I think the Greens will be disappointed. I caught up with Earl later last week, and he looked confident in terms of his campaign. They've got plenty of signs out in the street as well. Again, they're seasoned campaigners in this area, but there's a clear message in this, and keep in mind that the Gateway Ward result for the Greens last time was a significant swing against them, which has been repeated in this part of the ward again. But the ALP, perhaps candidate selection, lives in Elwood, etc. Albeit she ran a pretty solid campaign and was well represented and well presented, etc. Hasn't obviously cut through. The local campaign from Betty J appears to be the case, and I think she'll probably be the victor. Andrew, what's your thoughts on this ward result?
I think this is probably be a very strong victory for Betty J. Bridget Mullahy should get through to the final two off the back of Earl James's preferences. I think the Greens preferences will flow through to the ALP and get Bridget into the final two. But it's hard to see Trina Lewis's preferences going anywhere other than to Betty J with the how to vote, or the suggested how to vote in the ballot pack, and the donkey vote also going to Betty. So I think this will be a very strong win for Betty J here.
So there we go. Betty J likely to be your next councillor for the South Melbourne ward. Keep in mind, these are very provisional numbers. They're only primary numbers. There's a long way to go until the final result is uncovered. But I think there's a bit of a consensus view here at the moment that Betty J is likely to come in as the victor in South Melbourne ward. which is, kudos to her and her team for pulling that off. I had some messages from her campaign team this afternoon that were saying she's a force of nature. She's given everything she possibly can to this campaign, and that's testament to the result that she's been able to pull off here this evening. Let's go to the final ward that we looked at in terms of results here this afternoon, gentlemen, which is Elwood. It was, as we talked about previously, it was really Louise Crawford's to lose. She's a well-known candidate in this area, going for her third term. She's a former mayor, and she also ran in the state seat of Brighton, which includes this part of Elwood. So name recognition should be high. Take us through, Andrew. What are your thoughts on the results that we saw here?
Look, I'm very surprised that Louise only got 29% in a 4-candidate election. Last time, when there were 10 candidates, she got just under 25%, which was a very strong showing from Louise. And with the 6 less candidates, she's only improved 4% in her primary vote, which I thought she would do much better than that. I was also surprised that Janet De Silva has got as high as she has, and Sally Gibson also surprised me. I thought Sally would probably finish last, but I didn't think she'd get close to 15%. I don't think Janet, I thought, would get anywhere near the Greens and ALP in terms of her primary vote. So that's another surprise. In terms of how I see this playing out, Sally Gibson did have Louise 2 on her how to vote card, but I'm not sure how widely that was distributed. I also believe there may be an independent bias coming out of Sally Gibson's preferences, whereby a greater than expected proportion of Sally's preferences will go to Janet De Silva, which could get Janet up over either or both Liliana and Louise to finish into the top 2. If that happens, both Louise and Liliana have preferenced each other, or have preferenced Janet over the other, and Liliana and Janet have both preferenced each other over Louise. So I am struggling to see a path to victory here for Louise Crawford. Preferences are strange things, but if what I understand the preferences have been for these candidates in this ward, I'm not seeing a path to victory for Louise Crawford here. So it's going to be very tough for Louise from here on to get home. And I suspect it will be Janet De Silva coming from third to win the seat, is my gut feel.
Greg, what's your view? What's your view on this result to start with? I know you don't like giving predictions. This got a long way to play out, but what's your comments on the results that you're seeing on the screen here?
The scrutineer information I've got was that Sally Gibson's preferences go 60% to Janet De Silva. So if that's true, that gets her up over Liliana, and Liliana's preferences go last to Crawford. So, but look, I don't know whether people follow these preferences. So, I know I'm getting splinters in my derriere from being on the fence, but I think it's too close to call. But I definitely thought Louise was the front runner here. So that's a disappointing result for her.
Yeah, I did hear from the Greens a few weeks ago that they thought that an upset was on the cards in this ward against the ALP in terms of Liliana coming above Louise. That hasn't played out tonight either. The real surprise here is the solid performance of almost 30% of primary vote by Janet De Silva. There's a lot of Liberal votes that had to find a home, probably 1 in 5. There's no obvious Liberal candidate there. And speaking to some Liberal voters in this area, and as we heard from the member for Brighton in one of our episodes last week, this is probably the obvious candidate where those votes were going to go, and that's obviously where it's gone. Plus, she's well known in the local area. She's involved in a lot of community groups and educational groups. So, I think it's probably, in my mind, too close to call at the moment about which one wins. But I think I am prepared to call that I don't think Louise Crawford is going to be the winner. I think it's either the Greens or or Janet De Silva's going to win it. And probably, as Andrew said, Janet De Silva's going to come across the line. But still a bit too close to call, but it's probably unlikely based on the preferences that Louise Crawford is going to be returned for our third term, which is a huge upset and a massive surprise.
Well, we have to be honest to the listeners, because it's only half the vote and the way the preferences flow isn't clear. And we've got three candidates neck and neck. There's only 100 votes between them. So, we shouldn't write off anybody, but we can say that it's...
We don't get paid the big bucks to sit here and have fun on the fence, Greg.
Well, that's because two of you are definitely on one side of the fence, and I'm trying to sit on top of it.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Councillors are paid to make decisions, Greg. We're not here to go both ways. We've got to make a decision. You've got to vote one way or the other, and we're here to.
And you guys have voted you voted with your feet.
Absolutely. So, Andrew and Greg, tell me, are there any predictions that you're willing to make here based on the data and the results you've seen here today in other wards? Any trends that you think will play out in other wards in the next couple of days?
I'll predict that the Greens and the ALP regret not putting each other 1 and 2 in all of the wards across all of Port Phillip. Based on what we've seen today, it's probably going to cost 1 or 2 of them spots on the council. Yeah, I think that was probably quite silly from a political point of view between the two of them, not being able to come to some sort of agreement here. And they weren't preferencing each other in Elwood, Balaclava, Alma, St Kilda. So I think they may regret that. I think they all expected that those 4 wards would be either Green or ALP wards very easily. And it turns out that that's probably not going to be the case. And we've only got results for 2 of them, and it looks like they may miss out in both seats. I think, if you had have said a week ago, those 4 seats, I think most people would have thought they would be either all Green seats or a combination of Green and ALP seats. And the 2 we've got so far, it's going to be neither. So they may regret not working closer together. In terms of preferences and in terms of the way they've run their campaigns.
Greg?
Well, I think, look, I'm not sure, to be honest. People are urging me to have a crack, and the crack I will say is that, something where people haven't been able to get a real grip on a key defining issue, and the rush to vote at the end with the queues around the block is that there'll be a lot of the donkey vote will be quite high. Well, sorry, I shouldn't call it a donkey vote, but the people who vote based on scan information or doing a 1 to 5 up or down the ticket could be 5 or 10% higher than normal. And that will put all these results all over the shop, like a mad person's laundry.
Well, yeah, and we take that trend out to the other wards, particularly Montague Ward, etc. If we're seeing the incumbents not do particularly well, and the major party vote not doing very well, that bides very interesting. And in terms of donkey vote, we don't have a situation where incumbents or the parties really have an advantage in the way they're positioned on the balance in some of those wards. We could have a situation where we have no incumbents elected to the next City of Port Phillip Council.
Well, that's right. It's the only one that, that's highly likely. There is no existing councillors yet.
Andrew, final thoughts?
I think what we've seen tonight makes the other wards very, very interesting. Anyone who's running as an independent or not politically aligned in some of the other wards would probably fancy their chances based on what we see tonight. We get 3 more results tomorrow, or preliminary results tomorrow, and we'll get a good insight into what's going on into 3 more wards. And if what we've seen today continues, there could be some surprises tomorrow. Also, some people who didn't expect to be elected to council suddenly find themselves in the top couple on the ballot paper.
Well, even Trina Lewis could. You can see scrolling on the on your screen right here now. So Albert Park, Alma, and Lakeside preliminary results will be shown tomorrow. Thursday, we got Balaclava, Montague, and Port Melbourne ward. We'll also ask for some special guests to come on in terms of some candidates, which I've started asking now. But wow, an interesting day. Keep in mind that we are only talking provisional results here. It's just over half the total amount of ballots that have been counted. But if we look back at the 2020 election results, these hold pretty firm in terms of a good indication and trend for where the primary votes will sit. It's a much more complex equation in terms of trying to predict where the preferences go. So Greg Day and Andrew Bond, thank you so much for joining us here again this evening. And thank you to the large number of people that have joined us online here also. We'll keep you updated probably tomorrow night, depending on the quality of results we get back. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks.